we finish the PhD. So we're going to move to Yenushka now, who's going to present her work in progress master's thesis. Yenushka is going to share her screen as well. And again, guys, if you've got questions, please feel free to either post in the chat along the way or save them to the end to ask Yenushka.
Is that working? Like, is that fine?
We are in presenter mode.
Oh, I can't with my life. Okay, hold the phone. Give me 2 seconds. Okay.
Still presenter mode.
Good?
Yeah, perfect. There you go. Well done.
Oh, amazing. Okay, cool. So, yeah, for anyone that doesn't know me, I'm Yenushka. So I'm completing my master's project at the moment, supervised by Leisha. So yeah, I'll be talking about Otis, a chatbot that we developed to hopefully prevent health anxiety. So let me just... Cool. So let's start off with what health anxiety is. It's important to start by saying that a focus on health is very imperative to our survival, and some low-grade anxiety is actually what motivates people to seek help when they notice that something's wrong. But the tendency to constantly misinterpret these ambiguous symptoms and health information as a serious physical illness is known as health anxiety. So in the past, it was known as hypochondriasis, a depressive disorder that was thought to be mostly untreatable. And that has now changed in the DSM-5, and that diagnosis has been split to better encompass sort of the spectrum of health anxiety, so to speak, into somatic symptom disorder and illness anxiety disorder. So illness anxiety disorder is synonymous with health anxiety, but I'll just keep using that term because it's shorter. So the old hypochondriasis diagnosis held a lot of stigma and sort of this idea that it was for a condition that people had when they just wanted to talk about themselves, very self-centered sort of people. But in fact, those who experience health anxiety suffer greatly in their relationships, finances, and even their health when they start engaging in harmful anxiety-soothing behaviors. So it can also obviously affect the health system by increasing costs and reducing efficiency with the number of people that are constantly accessing services. And as it's a condition that's associated with unhelpful thoughts, treatments like CBT and its derivative ACT lend quite well to the condition and in turn have the greatest evidence base. So as we all know, with the COVID-19 pandemic, it took a massive toll on mental health. And one of the conditions that we understandably saw a rise in was in health anxiety. And there was a massive shift to telehealth that helped a lot of people who couldn't access, and in some cases wouldn't access the help that they needed. So telehealth in its many forms is an incredibly useful tool. And we've seen this sort of develop a lot over the last couple of decades with the dawn of the digital age. So there's been a massive uptake in technology in the past couple of decades, and New Zealand is definitely no exception, with an incredibly high internet and mobile phone use. There's also an increasing number of digital natives. This is a term that was coined by Mark Prensky, and to describe those born after 1980 and therefore more exposed to technology as they're kind of born into this very digital world. So the fact that cyberchondria is part of the health anxiety diagnosis and describes people constantly looking online for health information shows just how much digital technology is part of every aspect of our lives, and that health is definitely no exception. And in terms of mental health and technology, if you really boil down what a psychologist spends most of their time doing, it's talking to people. And so the technology that closely mimics this is chatbot technology. So chatbots or conversational agents are mostly used for e-commerce these days to answer frequently asked questions. But the first chatbot, Eliza, was actually developed by Joseph Weizenbaum to simulate Rogerian therapy and under what was called the doctor script. And there were many other scripts, but just for the purposes of illustrating my point, the doctor script. So chatbots are essentially, as I said, conversational agents. And there are two main types in the literature. So the first being artificially intelligent or AI bots, and they work independently to any sort of input other than their training. And to put what they do very, very simply, it's essentially pattern matching. So any input that they get, they match it to intents and responses, and then they produce an appropriate output. Since it's a relatively new technology, and it can simulate human conversation quite well, it can also produce very crude responses. So I'm sure when most of you have used Siri or Alexa, it's come up with some random responses, and that's essentially when that pattern matching is not working very well. And the other main type are decision tree-based bots, and they follow a script, and users can only use a limited set of responses. And so basically everything that the bot says is completely predetermined by the developer. And it's kind of similar to a choose your own adventure book. There is a set path, and it just depends on how you actually get to the end is defined by the user. So they can serve as a medium for patients in general, but could be very beneficial for health anxious patients who may be less likely to seek those services, especially during a pandemic. And while there's increasing research in the area with the likes of Woebot and Joyable, there's a lot more to be explored in human-bot interactions within a mental health context. So keeping that in mind, we developed Otis, a CBT-based chatbot on Facebook Messenger for health anxiety, hosted by the chat engine Chatfuel. So Otis is a primarily decision tree-based bot, and this call was made because it's early in its development, and we wanted to avoid any psychological harm from crude responses and focus more on validating the content. There were some basic AI rules built in, though, for the safety of users. So if a participant expressed suicidality or signs of self-harm, Otis was able to direct them to the appropriate crisis teams and helplines. And so also for greetings and things like that, just to make sure that it sort of felt very conversational. And Otis ran a 14-day program over Facebook Messenger, which covered the 5-part model, cognitive restructuring, things like that, in the hopes of reducing health anxiety among adult participants. There was a daily notification system to remind participants to chat to Otis every day, but to account for the low adherence with mHealth trials, we allowed participants a total of 21 days to complete the full program. So we assessed the feasibility by interpreting the number who accessed it and used it. The acceptability was assessed based on the various feedback we received at different points. And we were also interested in the effects. So we assessed health anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, intolerance of uncertainty we looked at because health anxiety is about that misinterpretation of ambiguous information. So we were interested to see if we saw an improvement in participants' ability to tolerate uncertainty. And also we looked at well-being and quality of life, since those can be affected by health anxiety. And as Leisha said, it's an ongoing study, so I'll just be presenting the data from these 3 time points. Cool. So we managed to recruit 69 participants over Facebook, Instagram, and email between May and July of this year. And unsurprisingly, we saw, as we see in a number of anxiety disorders and in research in general, there was a large group of female users, 74% of our sample, in fact. And again, unsurprisingly, a younger user profile with an average age sitting around 35 years. Since they're most likely to take up digital technology, I suppose. And also the sample was predominantly New Zealand European. So there is some questions around generalizability of the findings. So we were interested to see if there was a difference between people who did and didn't access Otis, but in terms of demographics, so education, age, gender, all of that, we couldn't actually find any. We also looked at the number of days participants completed, and so we saw a 7.5 day completion rate before either the 21 days were up or the people had abandoned the program. And seeing this level of attrition is very normal in health trials, and also keep in mind that 14 days covered roughly is 14 sessions of CBT, so it's quite a number of sessions for people to have engaged with, so 7.5 is pretty good. We also developed a 5-point scale ranging from 0 to 4 to assess the acceptability of various elements of the experience. And we found that on average, people rated the chatbot quite favorably, with slightly higher scores on the ease of use, Otis's appearance, and how well the bot worked. We also measured the overall enjoyment of the experience on a 10-point scale. And as you can see, on average, people seem to have really enjoyed it. So that was great. As I said before, we expected attrition, so we asked participants to pick any reasons that applied as to why they didn't complete the bot in the 21 days or abandoned it. And we found that a number of people cited that they didn't have time for the bot, which is understandable, and it's probably the reason you see such a high attrition rate in mHealth. Although it's meant to technically simulate therapy, a normal session would have the person's complete focus because they've made the appointment, they go, they're talking to someone. But when it's e-health, it's that sort of convenience that's almost its fault because people get busy with other things and it's just competing for time, basically. So technical issues, again, with technology, you need reliable people to make sure it runs smoothly. So that was also another reason that people cited for non-completion, and also about 14% no longer felt anxious during the trial. So we found, in terms of the effects, we found an improvement in the quality of life, personal well-being, and general anxiety, but not in health anxiety or intolerance of uncertainty. And like I mentioned earlier, anxiety over physical health is so important for survival. So seeing some level of it is very normal. And we theorize that we probably didn't see a decrease that reached significance in health anxiety because less than 20% of our sample was actually health anxious according to the health anxiety inventory that we used. And so the content may not have applied to them, and we may therefore be seeing a floor effect. And despite the country moving down lockdown levels all the way to level 1 during the when Otis was a thing, approximately 70% of participants reported worrying about COVID-19 when Otis asked them to share their illness worries. So perhaps another reason we didn't see an improvement is because the level of anxiety is simply functionally adaptive during a pandemic. And so in terms of qualitative results, we conducted some interviews and also received some written feedback within the bot and in the post-intervention questionnaire. After analyzing that data, we found 3 key themes relating to feasibility and acceptability. So the first being that Otis was competing for time. And this was reflected in the reasoning people gave in that earlier pie chart. So talking about being too busy, difficult to commit, and just a lack of time in general. So Otis was something that they were fitting into their day rather than sort of making time for like they would with an appointment. Also, we saw that Otis was definitely not a replacement for a health professional, which is, I'm sure, very promising for people who are clinicians or wanting to go into that side of things. So yeah, people would see Otis as a friendly aunt, an older brother, an advisor. And actually, when we asked a psychologist that took part in the study, they said that they were happy to recommend it, but they definitely wanted to support a client that was using it. So just really needing that person-to-person contact. And also that Otis facilitated behavior change. People cited that they were now going to possibly see the doctor over Googling their symptoms, and found that Otis was overall helpful, thought-provoking, and was kind of surprised as to how helpful it was. So in terms of acceptability, immediately we saw the anthropomorphization of Otis. People would talk about Otis sort of being a person, kind of being unable to tell the difference between a bot and a person, saying things like, I miss him, I miss our daily chats, and just basically ascribing a lot of human characteristics to Otis just from the get-go. And also there was a preference for a non-human avatar over a human avatar. And I thought this was probably the most interesting part of our findings, given all the research that's going into digital humans at the moment. These sort of very human-like faces that are actually made from like photos that you found on the internet. It's all composites of all of these different faces. So people were quite worried about whether or not the avatar would look trustworthy if it was a human. And my favorite one is this person saying, you know, even if it looked like an ex of yours or something, I wouldn't be very inclined to talk to Otis. So, which is fair enough. People also just thought that it would come across as quite fake if Otis was a person, like presented as a person rather than a bot, because it wouldn't give the idea that the bot is limited in its capacity. It's not a person, so it can't explore everything as a person usually would. And in terms of another acceptability theme was that there was a preference for greater interaction. And so this can only be sort of enabled by Otis becoming a lot more AI-based. So people preferred a more personalized version. They were frustrated by the limited response options. So they just wanted it to be a little bit more interactive. And so that would just mean making Otis more AI based. In terms of the implications, so what we found is that chatbots may be a feasible and effective part of the future of psychological services. Obviously, their advantages are to do with improving access, reach, and reducing costs, but it definitely seems like they can have some psychological benefits. So it could be useful in addressing the increasing demands on the workforce. Although their processing power is a lot greater, they should never be thought of as above human expertise, but rather an extension of our current capabilities. So in saying that, they should be viewed as complementary to existing treatment. And so people often think of computers and they think, oh, computers are just a lot smarter, but it's not, basically, because they are developed by humans, and so it's more the processing power. So there's no fatigue in terms of diagnosis. There's no that's what it does. That's sort of the advantage of computers over humans. It's not the fact that computers are technically smarter than humans, just in terms of speed, and fatigue is sort of its main advantages. And I'm also sure that a few decades ago, a psychologist working with a patient presenting with physical complaints may have been this crazy novel idea. So perhaps adding an AI is not so crazy after all. And so now adding them won't mean that we'll see the likes of Sophia, the first AI US citizen, because it's important to remember that humans will always be better than robots at being human. And the role of a psychologist especially does hinge so much on their ability to make human connection, to read body language, and genuinely express empathy, not just pattern match it. Cool. Yeah. Thank you. I just want to say thank you to Leisha, obviously, and also the designer of Otis, Jess. She was here a little while ago, but gone, but yeah.
Thank you so much, Yenushka. And also, I think the other great thing about chatbots is that they don't suffer from Zoom fatigue, unlike a lot of us are probably currently feeling in the current lockdown. Any questions or comments from anyone, either for Yenushka's or for Alina's presentation? Nathan?
Why do you get a reduction in general anxiety and an improvement in quality of life, but not a change in health-specific anxiety, which is, I assume, the target? It would seem like a discriminant validity issue.
Yes, we had this sort of chat, and I think personally, I'm not 100% sure, I'll have to keep looking, but I think in terms of, there was a lowering in anxiety because people were probably equipped with those sort of anxiety reducing techniques and things, but I think people were still at a heightened level of their health anxiety. So it's probably just looking at the different, what the health anxiety measure is sort of looking at. So yeah, discriminant validity, etc. But I think that's probably.
I mean, it's also possible, I guess, you might get some insight if you looked to see if you could find data showing that health anxiety was sort of increasing across the time that your chatbot should have been driving it down.
Mm.
And then you have a competing process which might sort of eliminate the health anxiety effect, but leave you with the general anxiety thing. So I would assume that for most people, especially in the first lockdown, that their anxiety at the beginning was sort of not particularly high. You know, it was sort of novel, it was interesting, it was kind of weird and cool, you got to work from home, no. But over time, as they got systematically sort of bombarded with, people are dying, thousands of people are getting it, it's going to be a plague, locusts, buboes, like this, that their health anxiety would go up over time.
Yeah, definitely an interesting point. It's just probably just having a look at the data, because I know that there are some trials going on about health anxiety in New Zealand, so hopefully we'll be able to look at those and see if that matches up.
Well, I was just thinking, I'm thinking about it in the context of not so much a question of whether you can interpret your bot as being efficacious, but more in terms of what it's actually accomplishing. If it's not accomplishing the thing that it's supposed to, but it is impacting other things, it's probably telling you a little bit about the mechanism by which it's operating. Which may or may not have stuff all to do with health anxiety by the look of it, hard to say. So I'm trying to offer you a competing explanation where you can still cling to your health anxiety interpretation by saying, yes, it's working, it's just that health anxiety was increasing in the background.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I will definitely Yeah, that's going to be in the discussion, Nathan. It'll be
Okay.
I think also, Yenushka, you collected data too on what they were feeling anxious about too, about whether it was COVID or cancer or other things, and that would also be important to look at around, you know, what is it that they're actually addressing with the intervention. That would be an interesting thing to look at too.
I mean, that's an interesting comment. What do you think, Yenushka? Would people's anxiety about cancer or their gout or their diabetes, would that concurrently go up?
I would say so, especially because they're at like a higher risk, I suppose, of infection and things. So I'm like, well, of having a worse time with COVID. So I think so. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Oh, John.
You have to turn your video on before you're allowed to talk, John.
Why, you don't want to see me. It's horrible. Look, I wanted to say, first of all, these are two very interesting and I think highly relevant papers. And I think we need to be looking ahead to the revolution in medicine that we need. Now, you on your slides, you said something about the robots aren't human. Well, I'm glad of that, because if you look at what the human doctors are doing for gout, it's bloody awful. So the last thing we want really human. But I would like to see the triage system in medicine completely changed so that the doctors are out of the picture. And the triage is done by a nurse and or a technician who has various things like such as your chat box to work on. And then the doctor will get people where you can't resolve the issue in that way. It costs me $57 to go and see my GP, which is a special rate for old people. And in return for that, I get a consultation of 9 minutes. So that trying to get the kind of information that was so lacking about gout, I think it's an economic unreality to think we're going to get that out of using expensive, scarce professionals. So I'd like to kick the doctors out of the front line, put them in the second line, and leave the frontline triage to caring, sensitive human beings, mostly women, of course, and you know, a technician's access to various other things to help. So there you are. That's my vision for the future.
Sounds pretty good, honestly. I'm here for this. So
yeah, well, it'll be a good
woman, all good.
Well, what I wanted to do, which I can't manage to do, is for the medical school to set up a clinic, and a primary level clinic in which the whole purpose is to experiment with new forms of delivery of primary level mental health services. But the GPs don't want that, obviously, and neither do the other people in the medical school, so I shall die unhappy.
Oh, John, this sounds an opportunity for writing some grant applications there and, you know, setting something up.
Anyway, very good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? No? Well, thank you very much, Yenushka and Alina, for your talks today. I'm sure that you've given people lots to think about. I will be making these available for people that haven't been able to attend. And also just a reminder that for the next 2 weeks, we are on mid-semester breaks. There'll be no seminar series. The next one after that, I believe from memory, is Anna and Jennifer presenting, but I could be wrong. But we'll circulate that out soon as a reminder as well. So thank you very much for attending, and then maybe next time we'll see you all in person. Fingers crossed. See you later, everyone.
Bye, Lisa.
Thank you.
See you. Thank you.
Good.